President Dave Aguzzi. Dave, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing pretty decent actually for the circumstances right now. How about
Yeah,
yourself?
doing pretty good, man. It's definitely some crazy times, and we're all feeling it. And you and I mean, definitely more so, being as most gyms are shut down and your events are completely shut down because of these capacities on gatherings and stuff like that.
Yeah, everything is pretty much shut down at the current moment. It really came to a halt like middle of last week, I would say. It became like a dismantling phase for events right now. Like how can we dismantle as many events as we can, like as quickly as possible? And it all happened like really all of a sudden, I would say. Like there was some like preemptive warnings, but middle of last week everything came to a halt.
Yeah, that's about the same for me as well. I had to shut my gym down on Monday, and then Friday they had the actual like all gyms are closed, restaurants, and all that fun stuff. Now you're in New York right now, right? Or are you in Montreal?
I'm in Montreal right now.
Okay, yeah, and it seems like Canada's having almost better. There seems to be way less of a percentage of the outbreak. Obviously, it's a smaller population and stuff like that, but it seems like Canada is doing a better job of containing this kind of stuff than say the U.S.
Um, I would say so far it has, but it's hard to say. Like you said, we're 1/10 of the population of the United States. We're about like
Dave, how are you, my
35. We're about like 35 or 36 million people in Canada. But we have the similar everything that's happening in the States is similar right now in Canada. Our prime minister is showing up every day on the news. So is the provincial prime ministers. They're showing up every day on the news, and every day a little bit more gets closed, a little bit more gets locked out. Yesterday, we put finally in that essential services will remain open, everything else will stay closed. And by next week, we're thinking we're even going to stop probably restaurants and bars from takeout and delivery. That's probably going to happen next week as well here.
Yeah, Florida's a little bit behind right now. We just closed down like the main eating areas and stuff like that, so we still have to go and stuff like that going and all that fun stuff. But I don't know if it's the same for you guys up there, but on the list of essential businesses, liquor stores are on the list down here in the U.S.
So we in Montreal in Quebec, I guess. I guess you're from Quebec actually, right?
Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
was born in
So
Laval.
okay, so there you go. So everything in Quebec right now, as far as liquor stores and dispensaries, those are allowed to stay open. Grocery stores and pharmacies, and everything else is closed. So basically, there's like 4, 5 things that are open,
Yeah.
considering gas stations, of course, as well.
So this has taken a huge toll on the economy, and I mean, it happens every few years. We go through a recession and stuff like that, and I mean, 2008 was the last time, but the economy's taken a pretty big toll from this. What's your kind of take on all that fun stuff?
So I'm actually invested in the stock market as well.
Yeah,
Pretty fully invested actually. I've got a pretty good portfolio in there, and so with the portfolio, it allows me to keep looking at the economy clearly. Like I'm one of those people that looked at it every single day for the past like year. This definitely will have its tolls. Um, I don't think it's a 2 week issue,
no,
especially as since not every state or every province in Canada is on the same page yet. I think you really need a complete shutdown if we're gonna like try to flatten the curve, as they say. But even then, like that doesn't stop the peaking from happening further on later on. Since as testing becomes more regular right now, the numbers will increase more readily. But no, it's definitely going to take an effect on its economy. It's going to take an effect on jujitsu as well. I think originally a lot of jujitsu gyms thought they were going to be closed for 2 weeks, and now it's beginning to hit some of these instructors and gym owners that this might actually take 2, 3 months. So I think it's a good time for everyone to start planning around the worst rather than planning around being open in 2 weeks. That would be a good head start for everybody. Um, I think when looking at the overall economy, I think there might be a lot of layoffs right now. In Canada, last week we reported 700,000 layoffs. This week we're expecting another 1 million layoffs. So we've broken all records in Canada of EI applications as far as employment insurance. I think you're going to see the same in the States once the stimulus proposals come out, maybe today or tomorrow in the States, that the Democrats and Republicans are fighting over. Um,
yeah,
but but I think like even once this is all over with, I think the economy still, even if this lasts a month or two, the economy can rebalance itself really quickly. A lot of the companies, a lot of the biggest companies, corporations in the States have a lot of money right now. If you're looking at their financials in the stock market, then you can see that they can last this. Even like the airlines, for example, and the cruise companies, they might ask for bailouts because they've got hit hard. But for the most part, they all have a lot of money on their books. And that will allow them to make it through this. I think that every company is probably, like I was saying, laying off people. But once this all ends, about 60-70% of those people are going to get to come back to work right away. And then when things fully vamp up, the rest of the 20-30% left over will come back to work as well. But I think like putting a lot of people out for 2 weeks from their jobs is going to hurt a lot of people. Clearly, like we hear it a lot that there's a lot of people living check to check, paycheck to
Yeah.
paycheck. A lot of people don't have $1,000 reserved for in case of emergency happens. Most people don't have 3 to 6 months reserved for the rainy day. Like this is really that test. Like everything they try to ever teach us in financial literacy, this is that test. I've come out to the conclusion of that. Like this is the 3 to 6 month rainy day fund. This is do you have enough money for an emergency? Do you have enough money for food? It would be really helpful, I would imagine, for a mass part of the population if we stop rents and mortgages, clearly, because that seems to be the number one expense for a lot of people. But it's hard to say when that's going to happen. I can tell you in Canada that the banks are beginning to delay mortgage payments,
Yeah.
but it hasn't been mentioned about rent yet. And another thing is it has like mortgage payments and rent hasn't been delayed for commercial businesses either. So if we're talking about the economy, it's very possible that the whole commercial rent space is the next thing to collapse. If companies aren't doing work, but they're still being asked to pay their rents, you can see how a lot of companies could start really going through their cash pretty quickly, especially like
Yeah.
in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and gyms, for example, where their rent is one of their biggest costs.
Yeah, it's crazy because luckily for me, I do have reserves, especially for the gym. So we're good to go for 3 or 4 months with no
Yeah,
income. I mean,
that's
we're
great.
we're a new business, so we planned that. Like I opened February of last year. We planned for months and months without any income, and luckily for us, like we jumped and went to a big number of students coming in and income coming in pretty quickly. So we still had a good reserve. It's really scary because I see a lot of my colleagues, they don't have that financial literacy. Because I mean, think about your stereotypical jujitsu instructor, probably doesn't have a college education, former MMA fighter, something like that. And finances is just something that's not really talked about in our education system coming up. So it's going to be really scary in the next 3 to 6 months for local gym instructors. Because I mean, I just got an email from my landlord today saying that he still expects rent payments on the 1st of April, which isn't a big deal for me, but for a lot of people, that's a big chunk of money, like you were saying.
Um, and the unfortunate thing is that like we can't even put it on we can't blame the landlords either. I
No.
mean, they need to pay their mortgages on those
Yes.
buildings. So it really goes back to the banks. And like if you want the banks to lay all mortgages, even on landlords or for commercial rent, then the banks are the ones that are going to get the big hit at the end. And I assure you, like no one wants the banks to get a big hit. Last time the banks got a big hit, like it was a crisis just by itself. So if
Yeah.
we have to put that crisis again on top of this crisis, it's going to be really not what we're looking for. I think the reserve thing, like you mentioned, having reserves is really the most important thing now. Everyone who saved money and was trying to build their company, it's kind of like growth has temporarily stopped and it's more about survival of the fittest, as I like to describe it right now. Um, but those that have the reserves afterwards, I think everyone is going to make their evaluations are going to come back, for example.
So let's remember that survival of the fittest, because I want to get back to that before after this question. So you said something about the airlines and the cruise lines being able to make it through this. I know for me personally, I'm looking at the stock market with, oh man, I can make some money in the long term from this. Personally, I look at like Spirit Airlines and these cruise lines right now, they're at an all-time low as a long-term play. Do you like that as a pick?
Well, I really believe in diversification, to be honest, and long-term
Yeah.
playing. So I'm one of those people. This is the first time I've been involved in the stock market while it was crashing. So
Uh-huh.
I'm trying to just follow the rules right now. The rule of like, don't panic and sell.
Hmm.
Don't get rid of your long-term investments. Um, this is the reason why we diversified. This whole thing right now is a test, right? From your financial literacy to how well you latch down the latches on your company. How well did you stop the expenditures? Do you have enough cash flow to make it through this? Do you have enough money to restart afterwards? As far as airlines and cruises, cruises is an interesting one because I own stock in Royal Caribbean Cruise. Before this
Yeah.
all started, it was $132 a share. Now it's $22 a share. I
Yep.
think it's gone up today because everything has gone up today about like 7 to 12%. So
Yep.
we're having one of those big rise days. Like that's why you don't time the market, because you'll miss a day like today. And days like today are very important because, like, I read somewhere, and it keeps getting repeated a lot lately because of how volatile the market is. But if you missed the 10 to 15 biggest trading days over like the last decade, you really wouldn't have made that much money on your investment of, let's say, $10,000. Airlines, like right now, like the big ones like Delta, I mean, they've been issuing credits and they have a lot of money. So even if they lose $2 billion this month or over the next quarter, they still have enough money to return. I know United is out there saying that they're going to have massive layoffs, but again, I mean, United dragged the person off a plane with a bloody nose, and their sales didn't decrease over the next quarter. They stepped stagnant and rising. So and cruises, like I was saying, that I have a share in. I've thought about it a lot. Will people stop going on cruises? These are like floating petri dishes, as some people describe them. But I think people will continue to go on cruises after this.
Of course they will. We still have people in Florida doing spring break right in the
But
middle of all
that's
this.
the thing. Like, especially like a lot of America might not care about cruises, but Florida does care about cruises.
Yeah.
It's a huge market for Florida. It's a huge market for Washington State, actually, with the boats that go up to Alaska. Even California has cruises. It's such a huge market. I know Royal Caribbean Cruise has 77,000 employees, and they have enough money to last 18 months at this rate. So it goes to show how big these companies are. Like Royal Caribbean Cruises, I think last year did 2.4 billion in sales. To imagine that 2.4 billion in sales is going to be turned into like a million is impossible. Also, if we don't bail them out, if they need a bailout, then it becomes weird, because what are we going to do with 77,000 people without jobs, or even half of that if they don't get returns back to their jobs from their layoffs? So. Would I say they're good investments? Probably. I mean, once they reach their bottoms, I think last I heard, Royal Caribbean Cruise was supposed to go down to $10, and by the end of the year, they were expecting to be back at $55, and next year
Yeah.
expecting to be back to 115. So the economy isn't going to return itself back to the peak of the prices like overnight, but it's going to happen. It always happens.
Yeah, it always rebalances.
Yeah, and like
So
we just said, cruises are not cruises are not going to die, especially when you consider which markets are so important to them.
yeah, that's totally true. Now, you said something about wartime generals, time to tighten everything up. So I'm guessing you and I probably listen to some of the same things. Gary Vee has something about this all the time, about when the economy is good, everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. Everybody wants to start a clothing brand, all this fun stuff. But when the economy takes a shit, that's when you find out who is a real entrepreneur, because they have to tighten everything up and find a way to still make it through these tough times. And I mean, we know your company's taken some events and had to postpone it, and you guys are dealing with this just like the rest of us. First off, how is Grappling Industries affected, and how do you guys plan on dealing with it long term?
Well, the first thing we were affected by was the number of cancellations that just occurred like instantly. Like there was no way we were able to have April shows or the end of March, for instance, and the first half of May. And so first it was the cash flow. So when you cancel shows that have low numbers, you need to refund those numbers. So first, like any money that we had collected on future registrations had to go back. That was, by the end of it, it's somewhere between 175 and 200,000 in cash flow that was refunded. The next thing was the loss of money on those shows. So advertising that you had spent on canceled shows isn't coming back to you by Facebook. I've had this conversation with Facebook. I know they're not issuing credits. I know they released $100 million grant for companies like mine, but it's uncertain yet about how that will affect anything. After the cash flow, after you refund all the cash flow, almost, you realize the sales dry up really quickly. Grappling Industries, was doing, I think, $8,000 to $13,000 a day in sales just through online registrations, and that one day it went from like 12,000 to 6,000, the next day 3,000, the next day 2,000, then 1,000, then $600, and like $100, and then it was zero. So sales completely dries up because people clearly are either losing their jobs, being laid off, or they're just buckling down on their expenditures, focusing on food and medical supplies right now. Um, and then right at that point, it becomes, once the cash flow is gone, once the sales is gone, um, man, I really need to stop the bleeding of anything that's being spent, which you can only do so well. Clearly, I mean, in theory, there's things that you can't stop or freeze in the world, like truck leases. They don't freeze. I had this conversation with Ford. They're not freezing truck leases. I'm still in possession of their trucks, so I need to pay for those leases. Um, Employees payroll, like that's the thing that's going to keep going on unless you freeze it and you send them on EI. Right now we have our entire staff still on payroll, but we've just started discussing clearly with them about like the date that like we're not going to be able to go further than this on payroll, or else companies that continue to pay their payroll right now even without any activity, they're just going to put themselves in liquid issues. And liquidity is going to become a really important thing in 3 months. So it really depends on how much reserves you have. If you have $5 million in reserves, you can pay your payroll if it's not $1 million a week, which most people it isn't. But even if I think like our payroll at that point was $10,000 a week, and like, I mean, if you want to do that for 17, 18 weeks, it really starts to add up. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars in payroll without any incoming sales. So we've discussed with them what the best plan is, what the EI plan would be, how long this is going to take probably. And then from there, it's just about cutting out all the rest of the expenses and just bring the whole company to a halt, like just a temporary halt and a waiting period. There's a lot of expenses too people aren't thinking about that are still going to be there as well. Like the tax season in the States is in April.
Yep.
They've delayed it to July. If I owe X in April, and I don't get to work for 3 months until July, I still owe X.
Yeah.
Like that number didn't change. You delayed it for 3 months for me, which is great. Thank you. But I still owe the same amount that luckily you need to be able to have put aside prior if you're going to pay it in 3 months if you haven't worked. So I think that's going to crush a lot of people as well. But I think right now Grappling Industries is still very healthy. Having talked to all 15 employees over the last couple of days, they all plan to still be here. I don't plan to fire a single one or cut down the amount of business we plan to conduct afterwards. I think we have enough reserves in place that when this all ends, that we're going to try to jump back on the ship right away. However, I've also had the conversation with them that it's not going to be Trump announcing on a Monday that everything is fine, everyone can go back to work, and then the state's saying the same thing, and then on the following Saturday we're going to have a tournament. It's not the way it's going to work. I can't just pop up a tournament and have people sign up, hundreds of people sign up for a Saturday. It's going to take 4 to 5 weeks for that to happen. I need the month to 6 weeks to advertise that tournament. People need to get in the gym and actually train for the tournament because most people don't want to compete if they're rusty. Some people might not have the income to actually compete or register for a tournament at that moment. So we need to extend it for various reasons. And I mean, another reason is I think we have created a lot of germaphobes over like this, and there will be germaphobes afterwards. But my fiance keeps reminding me that if you look at the market, if you look at 9/11, if you look at 2008 financial crisis, if you look at March, April of 2018 when the markets took a massive dip, that afterwards was always followed by mass entertainment, spending in entertainment. Especially now with a pandemic, people will have been locked inside for so long that there's going to be a rush on the jiu-jitsu gyms afterwards. People will want to train jiu-jitsu. People will want to go to the pub and drink with their friends or take their partners and families out to restaurants. There will be all of this. It's just a matter of how did this germaphobe concept or how did this change people forever, if that's a thing. But for us as well, in the meanwhile, what we're doing is we're working on creative and innovative stuff. We're trying to clean up our production. We're trying to make all 5, 6 productions look the same. We're working with our employees to find out what they've experienced over the last year, because when you're trying to run so many tournaments, there's a consistency to like, oh, we need to focus on the next tournament, we need to focus on the next tournament. And now there's like this big break, and it's like a chance for us to do all this spring cleaning inside of our company, work with the European lawyers on making sure we're all in regulation, making sure in the States our productions are fully what we wanted them to look like, finding out how we can run smoother events, just not being stagnant right now. A lot of people are going to be stagnant right now, and we need to not remain stagnant if we want to come out of this uh, with a better product as well.
Yeah, and that's something big that my coach has been harping on. And to give a little bit of background, my coach, he's got like a couple PhDs, master's degrees, and he's a professor at a university. So he's been saying to everyone that this is the time to plan your next move, and it seems like that's exactly what you guys are doing. And for some reason, I have a feeling that some of these other tournament organizations aren't doing that right now. You know, the IBJJF, the Nagas of the world, the competitors to your brand. I feel like obviously this isn't a good thing, but you're going to come out of this a lot prettier than most of the other tournament organizations and ready to go, firing on all cylinders. Do you feel like that's the case with your rival promotions and such?
Um, it's hard to say because at this moment, it's like almost all the rivalries have died. All the
Yeah.
hype is dead as well. It really goes to a question of their reserves, what they've decided to do in the meanwhile. I think these types of scenarios, these types of recession scenarios as well, create a lot of space for new players.
Mhm.
For every restaurant and bar that shuts down, there will be a new restaurant and bar being opened by someone who had the money saved, was not involved in the market, did not lose their job, and wanted to be an entrepreneur. Um, you're going to see a lot of winners come out of this, clearly. Like people are made rich during recessions. So the richer people are going to take huge advantage of this. And those of us that are savvy and are still trying to improve our businesses in the meanwhile, or make sure that we have a growing pattern still afterwards, we're also going to take advantage of it. I'm not sure what the IBJJF is doing. I'm not sure what NAGA is doing. I know New Breed was trying to still get events off the floor, and then they realized they had to come to a halt as well.
Yep.
Um, I know, like through my discussion with some promoters, that they've had a hard time, and they're going to have a hard time after this. Um, but I think like if you're only running a few events at a time, it's easier to come to a halt than if you were running like 100 events in the future, like we were. I
Yeah.
think the hardest time for jiu-jitsu will definitely be the gyms. I think like we were saying at the beginning of this conversation, a lot of them expected 2 weeks delays. Now it's looking like a 2 to 4 month delay. For a lot of gyms, they can't survive that, even with the massive influx afterwards that will happen. They just can't survive the downtime, which is what we were talking about, the survival of the fittest. There's going to be a lot of people left without gyms, and they're going to join other gyms, and those gyms will become stronger. And there's going to be a lot of people who lost their gyms, and they're going to decide to start gyms because of it. But man, I think there's like 1 in 5 gyms have the potential of closing over the next quarter.
Honestly, I think it's a little bit more than that. I think
It could be, yeah.
yeah. Now, seeing as the gyms are your main market for your tournaments and stuff like that, do you have any advice to these guys on how to maybe bring in some liquidity, bring in some funds during this time of crisis? I know you guys, if people want to support you, you guys are selling like your lifetime passes like you have in the past and all that fun stuff. Is there any recommendations you would have to a gym owner who's sitting here thinking, oh man, this could be really bad. I might not have a gym to come back to?
Well, gym owners, like you said earlier that your landlord isn't going to stop the rent, for example. So that would be the first starting point, is like negotiating out with everyone that has any money coming from you, right? So your landlord, discussing with them, discussing with your insurance company if they'll freeze the insurance costs because the gym's not active at the current moment. Um, I've put a lot of emphasis on like check out your government stimulus programs. In Canada, we have a lot of assistance programs being announced every day right now. In Australia as well, Europe is beginning to come out with a few, and clearly we're all waiting for the Americans to come out with theirs. Um, I think the stock market is up today because of the waiting for the stimulus project. Um, so once Trump is able to announce that, and some states are announcing what they're doing on a state level, I think those are worth jumping on. There's a lot of things that are helping businesses right now, besides the regular stuff of delaying taxes and stuff. Um, really, like at the moment, like if liquidity becomes an issue for a lot of these players, but they have the confidence in themselves after this, this situation passes itself, then it might be a good time to get a loan rather than an investment. The loans are 0% interest right now. The Fed brought down the interest rate to zero. And as well, like, that's what I'm saying. Like, it really feels like it's a really dig deep type of moment for a lot of these people. It's a question of like, if they wanted to run a gym, was it the idea of owning a business, or was it the idea of having your own place to train jujitsu? Because if this was just a hobby for you to own a gym, then this is the worst thing that can happen to you. Now, if this is your business, this is how you feed your family, and like another three professors, for instance, then it really becomes like a how bad do you want it kind of thing. So you'd be looking at assistance programs, you'd be looking at what loans your banks are offering, uh, what the government is offering. Um, and just, there was like this whole idea of like people shouldn't be canceling their memberships right now, they should be freezing it or still paying through. But that was based on 2 weeks as well, right? Everything was based on 2 weeks. So I would then tell gym owners, like, focus on 4 months. Okay, because that's the even if it doesn't happen, let's say it doesn't happen as 4 months, and I hope it isn't either, but that's the worst case scenario right now. It took China like 3 months. It took other countries. Like, you see what Italy looks like on a 12-day quarantine, and it's still getting worse. Numbers are peaking. So that's going to happen with more testing as well. So we're only getting closer to a peak, and we're only getting closer to more shutdowns as far as I see it. So it's really a time for those gym owners to just consider, okay, 2 weeks was the first claim, but now can I do 4 months? And off the bat, you'll find out really quickly, like, which ones are going to say, oh, fuck this, I'm going to shut down now, or which ones are like, you know what, we need to find fundraising through other avenues. um, but it's hard to say. It's really hard to say, right? Because everyone's affected. So what should one industry do compared to other industries? It's all in theoretical right now.
Yeah, very true. Now, I want to kind of pivot a little bit to more the professional side of grappling, because I had Matt Kaplan on last night. We were talking about how we believe that the industry right now for professional grapplers, that the pay scale is a little bit inflated, and that it was going to take either something like this or some other substars happening many times and people not getting paid to bring the pays down. I know in the past you've done some super fights as well as just big events where you've had professional grapplers on the stage. How do you think this market, I mean, obviously it's going to go down just like everything else, but coming out of this, do you think there's going to be a rebalancing of athlete pay, or do you think it will continue in an upward trajectory? And what do you think the ceiling is? I know this is a lot of questions in one, but the ceiling of athlete pay in jiu-jitsu right now, and where do you think it will be going forward after this?
So I thought for a while that athlete pay in jiu-jitsu was a little bit weird, because we have promoted some super fights, of course, but when we've tried to get other super fights, the athlete comes out with this amount, and they're like, "Oh, I wouldn't do it for that amount. I would do it for this amount." And
Yeah.
like, the first amount was 3.5, and the second amount that they proposed was 15.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have to think about it from an event industry point. Like, we're running jiu-jitsu tournaments, so for us, we would be running the jiu-jitsu tournament, and there would be a super fight on the edge. So I know what the show makes as far as profit. I know how much it makes as far as sales. Can we take an extra 15,000 to pay this athlete plus an opponent, which is probably going to want a similar amount? It doesn't make sense,
No, it doesn't.
So then you look at the super fight concept, where it isn't a jiu-jitsu tournament anymore. And I would imagine jiu-jitsu tournaments make more than super fight shows, but supposedly super fight shows have streaming and live ticket sales and all this type of stuff. It becomes the same problem. There's no pay-per-view in jiu-jitsu, so you fall on the flow grappling years. The flow grappling isn't going to pay you enough money to cover the $15,000 athlete by himself. So putting on the whole card, it seems like kind of weird. Um, there hasn't been many people to actually build out the whole super fight show that's traveling, like Fight to Win. Like, the Fight to Win thing seems to be kind of like the leader right now, I would imagine, as far as like being able to put a show in different cities, but still have one or two or three headline fights. But fighter pay, like, I would say it started with Metamoris, clearly. Like, when Metamoris came out, they were exaggerating this pay on fighters, and fighters would be like, well, Halleck paid me this, like you have to pay me this as well. And then you realize what Halleck did was he didn't just give us something in Metamoris, but he absolutely destroyed a lot of these people's ideas about what they were worth. And then you start to see it still today with after Metamoris went away, ACB tried to replace them. ACB was, let's be honest, it's kind of like shady government. If you watch John Oliver, they've actually talked about the owner of ACB on that episode once. And they set out these random pays as well, where they were paying athletes 10, 15 grand. And furthermore, they were doing it in cash. So now you have these athletes who are expecting to be paid in cash, which fucking makes no sense. Let's be honest about it. Like, why can't you take a check? I mean, I'm going to declare it. You're going to declare it. You're going to pay your taxes. I'm going to tell them where I sent it. There's a trail of it. And then now they don't want this. They want cash. And then the ACB went away. Now you have like even in now it still exists. So you have BJJ stars in Brazil. Again, not a lot of pay-per-view, not a lot of people in the audience, but somehow they're able to afford these ridiculous shows, right? You can see it with Spider in Korea, $100,000 for two divisions, $200,000, but it's just dipping into advertising. These brands are either are finding loopholes to waste their money and gets tax credits for, or they're just doing it as advertising for their brand. But there's no way those athletes can earn that type of money on the natural front like today. Like Fight to Win isn't going to go pay someone 20 grand for a super fight. So like, for example, we see Third Coast Grappling announcing that Gordon Ryan will have 5 fights for 100 grand. And Gordon Ryan is the top tier, right? So if we're saying Gordon is worth 20, then that's as much as anyone gets in no gi, especially. In gi, maybe we can make an argument for guys like Marcelo or Roger Gracie, something like that. But even then, like you're saying, I need to create 20 grand of profit to pay one athlete. And that's really hard to do in the current state of jiu-jitsu when we don't have the national sponsors or world sponsors. There's no Red Bull, there's no Monster. They're not coming out and like signing $100,000 sponsorship checks. Even Grappling Industries, like or exclusive sponsors equal up to $100,000 a year. But I mean, I'm not going to blow an annual list of sponsors on one super fight show. Doesn't make any sense, and then I'm still risking losing money on that show. So it's just really hard to really understand the perspective of these brands, like the ones that are going full in or paying athletes more and more money. I think you're going to start to see athletes, to answer the second part of your question, I think you're going to start to see athletes like willing to take those shows where it's like, okay, winner of this 8-man tournament gets 5 grand or 10 grand, or 20 grand. I think that'll become more regular because it's in line with jiu-jitsu, winning fights to win an actual division. I think there's already too much trouble in jiu-jitsu of selling us individual fight to the public. So you had at Substars in Florida, you had Cyborg versus Rafael Lovato Jr., and it wasn't a big sale, and it doesn't make any sense. Cyborg is from the area. Rafael Lovato Jr. is one of the biggest in jiu-jitsu. That super fight is an A-list super fight, but it's just like people didn't really seem to care about it, you know? There's this culture in jiu-jitsu where it's like, okay, well, I don't need to pay $30 for it if the highlight or the match is going to be online for free afterwards. So even when Grappling Industries has done super fights, it's kind of been free streamed or released on the internet for free. Dante Leon versus Wagner Rocha, Keenan versus Gordon, Manchier versus Eddie Cummings, Tim Spriggs versus Craig Jones. Like, it's just, we're not going to make money off of the streaming or pay-per-view, so we release it for free. It's advertising for us, but it influxes the spectators at the events, so it kind of balances off for us, and we do it at our bigger shows that are going to have more profit rather than a small show like something like Grappling Industries, Boise or Salt Lake City or Fargo, North Dakota. Those shows, like, you want to travel with super fights, but you can't put them in shows where it's not going to afford it or you're going to take a haircut on it. So is fighter pay going to come down? Absolutely, most likely. Is it bad for the fighters? Yeah, it is absolutely bad for the fighters. But I don't think jiu-jitsu's ever been targeted around just super fights. Like those guys like Gordon Ryan, although Gordon Ryan makes a lot of money on super fights, he makes most of his money teaching. So it's through seminars, through DVDs. I think BJJ Fanatics added a whole department to jiu-jitsu with these DVDs, but I think it's also a timing issue right now where it's like, how many DVD instructional sets can I buy at $200 before my wife tells me to fuck off? You know,
Yep.
so that's the thing. Like Gordon might be coming out with 5 more instructional sets, but do I want to buy the 5 more instructional sets? What about that other guy I want to watch his stuff on, or Lachlan or Bernardo's? So it could be saturated as well later on. It's fresh right now, but it could lead to saturation in that marketplace. So it's just, the whole thing is really confusing, to be honest.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
but
a weird market, you know,
it
like
is a weird
jujitsu.
market.
Jiu-jitsu guys are, and I mean, you may not want to say this because you're catering to them more than I am, at least on a higher level. But jiu-jitsu guys are fucking cheap, and they always are trying to find a way to do something for, get something for free, you know. And like you said, you put most of your events, at least with the super fights, out for free as advertisement. And I honestly believe to grow the sport, that's what we need to do. We need to put a lot of our events out for free and get our money in from advertisers, just like when you look at the NFL on any of the networks, they all have commercials that are paying into it and it's out there for free for everybody to see because they're trying to keep growing their product and growing their brand. I think down the line, that's the way jiu-jitsu needs to be going, at least from the professional event standpoint, because let's be fair, pay-per-view is fairly dead for jiu-jitsu. Pay-per-view is pretty much dead unless you're at the upper echelons of boxing and MMA. You know, like Bellator has a hard time doing it. ONE FC has a hard time doing it. UFC model and boxing are the only ones that pull off pay-per-view fairly well, you know? So as far as growing the sport and growing the brand, I know it's something you guys do with a lot by going out and developing new territories, like you're saying, Boise, over in Salt Lake City and Fargo and all that fun stuff. Do you, how do you see the sport growing long term and developing new territories? Because I think that's key for the long-term growth of the sport. It can't just be New York, Florida, and California and Brazil, you know?
Yeah. Um, I wouldn't even have Florida in there as of now, to be honest.
Yeah.
I would probably have like Texas in there. But
Yeah.
well, the thing is, like, so it's easy, like, as us, like, both of us are in North America, so it's easy for us to focus on North America. But it's clearly like jiu-jitsu is clearly developing in places that we don't think about. In Australia, for instance, as you know, like Australian Brazilian jiu-jitsu is like peaking, like it's really, really getting high up there. Also in Europe, you can see it in UK and Ireland. It's absolutely massive. Then as you enter mainland Europe, on the richer countries like Germany, France, Netherlands, Belgium, Vienna, Australia, like these are very rich countries, and at the same time they have emerging jiu-jitsu and MMA programs. And then you can also see it in Eastern Europe, where the most of the black belts are actually in Europe, in Poland and Greece. Like there's tons of black belts there. I think it goes with two things. It goes with the economics of the country you're in, or the city, or the region, and it also goes with the population. So New York, there's a lot of money and there's a lot of people. So it allows someone like Marcelo Garcia and Henzo to build massive gyms, but it also allows a lot of smaller players who are witty about it, who understand marketing, understand customer service, to build huge teams as well right now. And this is gonna lead on to like different places. So in Spain, or like, because like Fargo is an example, Fargo, North Dakota, or Boise, or Vermont Jiu-Jitsu. And these are things similar to that of smaller places that we wouldn't think about daily, like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in Africa, in Nairobi, which is becoming a huge thing. I mean, I'm not sure people know that, but there's a emerging jiu-jitsu community in Nairobi, and they're having an annual tournament every year. And the first year it was 40 competitors, and the second year it was 80 competitors. It's not a lot. It's clearly not a lot. But in 10 years, who doesn't say that it might be 200 or 300 competitors, and twice a year? Um, so I think that's where the starting point is. You need people to, first of all, love jujitsu and train jujitsu. And then once they love and train jujitsu and they want to make it kind of part of their living, then they're going to open a jujitsu gym. From my understanding, 2 years ago, jiu-jitsu gyms. There were more people doing jiu-jitsu in the world than ever before, but the number of gyms hadn't really changed. So I'm assuming that in 2 months, when we see gyms starting to really close down rampantly, like it's going to be a similar situation where the same number of people are going to still want to do jiu-jitsu, but there's not going to be as many places to train. It's going to create new gyms to be open, just like the example of the bars and restaurants closing and new bars and restaurants taking those locations. Physical locations will always remain the same in those industries. So you're going to see more Brazilian jiu-jitsu gyms open, and you're going to see more people still doing jiu-jitsu. But it just depends on, in those smaller communities, having that person who decides, I'm going to open a jiu-jitsu gym. I'm going to take it seriously. I'm going to market to the high school. I'm going to market to the elementary school. I'm going to go to like the parade every year and like pass out pamphlets, and then really make that click where now they have 100 members or 200 members. In the Northeast, like upstate New York, somewhere between like Saratoga Springs and Albany, it's kind of in between Manhattan and the Quebec border. Just an hour off that highway is a city called Oneonta. And there's a gym there, Oneonta Academy, Martial Arts Academy. It's ran by a guy named Matt Martindale. Um, and that gym has 350 members. I mean, you're out in the middle of nowhere and you have 350 members, and like they're packed. Like when they were running classes, they were packed, and like everyone had to leave their jobs to run this jiu-jitsu gym because now they have all these members and all these kids are coming in. So they're an example I like to use because they're not in a metropolis, they're not in a million person area, but yet they're able to get people off the streets to come in and try this product, try this service that they're doing. And people like it and they re-sign up for it. And then they tell their friends and their friends come in. You really need those types of examples to happen if you want more and more jiu-jitsu competitors or more jiu-jitsu practitioners. Because don't forget, for every like 10 practitioners you make in jiu-jitsu, you probably have 2 that actually want to compete. The number of competitors versus practitioners are 2 completely different things as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, the only other thing I really have a question for you before I let you go or move on to whatever you want to talk about is you guys were running the only submission only for a little while. And for some reason, people didn't gravitate towards that, And in the past, we've seen events like the Good Fight do this to like varying levels of success. Do you think the no time limit submission only aspect of jiu-jitsu is completely dead? And that's pretty much the question. Do you think it's dead? Do you think it'll ever come back?
I think you can work on an individual fight. I mean, like you can do super fights with no time limit, or you can do very, very small things like an 8-person pay-per-view of no time limit, stuff like that maybe. But on a tournament front, the way we tried it, I don't think it works. I mean, I don't think that it's going to work for someone else and it just didn't work for us and someone better can do it. I don't believe that. I think that once we wrote down on paper why this didn't work out the way we wanted it to, then it made sense to us. Because the thing is, it's like it made money, it made profits, but the problem was that it was taking profits away from things that make a lot more profits. So what I mean by that is, like, you take a city like New York or Boston or Maryland. These are really big cities for grappling industries, and we come there with a grappling industries tournament. We do really great numbers, we do good profit. We're able to make the next shows bigger and bigger and bigger, which is how we built those cities. But then we come in with one of our also shows, only submission only shows, and then the same city sees the same company doing a different type of format tournament, and they don't like it because there's not as many people. It's single elimination. All these things had to be put in place to run a true submission only tournament. No time limit, no points, just absolutely ending with a submission. You had to make a single elimination. You had to run as many matches as you possibly could in case any match went 2 hours, which some did. The average length was actually 11 minutes, to be honest. So it's not like every match is going to go 2 hours. But the main thing we came to understand off of it is this, and like a lot of people might not agree with me, but the stats point directly to this, is that like most people in the gym can't finish their training partners. They can't tap their sparring partners. So if they can't tap their sparring partners, it becomes really confusing to ask them to pay $80 to participate in this tournament against someone who's going to be trying as hard as they can. And if you can't tap your sparring partners, what makes you think you're going to tap this guy who's going to go 100% on you. So most people are like, man, I'm not really good at submissions or finishing people. This might not be the format for me. And that's when we started thinking, oh, that's why points are so important in jiu-jitsu. Because although people are aiming for the submission, a lot of people might not be able to submit their opponent, and then they don't have the cardio to go 30 minutes if they have to do that. So we came up to the realization that having that time limit and having like some type of points that can be accumulated rather than having every match finish in submission, I think that's where the bulk is. That's where like you'll get an extra 200 signups. And when you do get an extra 200 signups for one of your formats compared to another format, then the smaller format feels like it's hurting the brand. Or even if it's its own like secondary brand, it feels like it's hurting that. So we decided to clearly like turn the only submission only format into like Grappling Industries. We changed a lot of the production on that, and we run Grappling Industries events with it now. And luckily, it's pretty useful because we needed a third truck, so it caters to the fact that there's a lot of smaller cities that weren't getting Grappling Industries. That smaller cities need to receive Grappling Industries because we need to build the smaller cities. No city starts with 300-400 competitors. You start most often with like 75 to 125, and then you have to build it to 600, and that takes time because if you're only running one event a weekend and I do bad that event, then I'm going to lose money on the weekend. If I run two events and I know one of them is successful, then it'll make money for the other show that loses money. But at least with the show that loses money, I can like plant seeds in that territory. And then we reach the point like where we are now, where most of the cities make money, but at the same time, there's still some cities we want to add that we need to take a loss on probably for the first year before they start generating massive numbers. And this isn't just to small cities. Like it happened to us in the big cities as well, like San Jose, Seattle, Denver, cities like this. I would imagine like at first we didn't have really respectable numbers. Like in Seattle and in San Jose, we had like 60, 70 competitors for our first shows, and we lost money on them, and it was really crummy. But by now we're doing like 300-400 competitors in San Jose. We're doing 200-300 competitors in Seattle, and those numbers are becoming increasing. They're increasing because now people are aware of us. The repeat customers are coming back. Gyms are beginning to pass the word on. We're understanding where our Pixel is targeting people in those regions. But yeah, I mean, it takes a while.
I mean, we could talk for hours. I probably want to have you on again next week because I want to get into a whole like actual segment of, because you do a better job than anyone I know about building territories and obviously building a brand. There's very few competitions that go to as many different cities as you do from North America, Europe, Australia, and we all know that doesn't happen overnight. So next week I want to get you back on and kind of pick your brain about growing the territories, how you did it without giving away too much. But honestly, I think you could give away the whole playbook and nobody would be able to replicate it because it takes a special person.
Just touching on that, actually, like I thought that after expanding to Australia, that expanding to the States would be easy. And then like the East Coast turned out to be incredibly hard. And then I thought once I was in the East Coast of the States and had expanded to Australia, man, I can expand to the West Coast quite easily. It turns out on the West Coast, they don't know what's happening on the East Coast. Turns out there's a lot of burger restaurants like Carl's Jr. and In-N-Out that they're not known on the other coast.
Yeah.
And then I thought after we did this, Europe is going to be a piece of cake. And it turns out Europe is completely different culture, completely different place, completely different languages, completely different way of doing things, different prices. And so it's a learning lesson. It's like each expansion turns out you don't know what you're doing, and no one's ever heard of you before. Doesn't matter if you have 125,000 Facebook likes or you can reach people with your Facebook ads. No one's heard of you. You have to start over. How good are you at like launching something from nothing based on like some former content that you put up?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I mean, every market's completely different. But is there anything else you want to touch on before I let you go?
Before you let me go, I would like to touch on that. I'm touching on this at the end of all the podcasts, so it's not just you. But I think like with the uncertainty amongst a lot of people haven't given like the mental health conversation a lot of conversation. Like I'm expecting suicide rates to increase this year, especially in the
Yeah.
States. Like last year, it increased already to number 10 on the list of reasons of death. And I would imagine this year it's going to move up to ninth or eighth. Um, so just remember that like all these jujitsu instructors that you call you're loyal to, like they should also be able to take your call if you're bummed out. If your own personal business is like being destroyed by the current situation, there's a lot of suicide helplines and hotlines that you can call or even ask about emotional distress. If you know your friends are suffering right now, you should probably help them as well or call them. Um, this is a good time to call people. Like I know we're all in self-isolation and quarantines depending on where you are, but it doesn't stop you from picking up the fucking call. Stop picking up the phone, and actually calling the people in your life. Um, and you just have to remember, even for those people that are economically being doomed by this right now, that it's just kind of like it's hard to say it because like I know some people are going to tell me to shut up, but it's paper. It's just paper, and the one rule about paper is that you can't kill yourself over it. That's one thing I've learned from the economy is like just because you lose money doesn't mean you can't restart. It doesn't mean things can't return. Um, so that's the one rule: you can't kill yourself. And it sounds ridiculous, but it's actually very useful right now because most likely the rest of your family is having a hard time too. And the last thing anyone really wants to deal right now with is suicide within your family. So
Yeah.
I just want to touch up on that. That like this is a good time to call people. To be honest.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up because as an instructor closing my gym, that was my biggest fear because I know how many of my students like this is their socialization. This is how they get out and meet people. This is where they relieve their stress. This is how they get through the day. And I know I'm going crazy. Like there's a reason I'm
Yeah.
doing as many interviews as I am because I'm going stir crazy. But a lot of people don't have the proper coping mechanisms. And when you remove jujitsu, which was one of their mechanisms, or any social interaction, obviously suicide rates are going to go through the roof, and it's extremely sad. And you're right, we should be. This is a time to come together and, as a community, build yourselves back up. And in most crisis situations, that's what happens. So I'm just hoping. I mean, right now out there in the world, it's a scary place. I'm not happy with what I'm seeing. Like when I go to the supermarket, everybody's fighting. We're not coming together, and I hope this is something, at least in the jiu-jitsu community, and eventually it'll spread nationwide, worldwide. This is something we can kind of come back from, help each other out, talk to each other, call, like you said, pick up the phone, check on everybody. This is definitely a time to be checking on people.
No, I agree. Like this is really like a weird time. So people like you see a lot on the internet right now, a lot of finger pointing, a lot of criticizing, a lot of how posts are going to age bad right now. Um, it's best to also take a break from social media right now. Like I've always said, and I've said this for a couple of years now, to be honest, to like the people around me, like if my business wasn't so involved in social media for the advertising front, then I would probably take long breaks from it.
Yes.
Um, Scrolling the timeline right now is not fun.
Nope.
There's a lot of fake news. There's a lot of people sharing articles that are not proofread or actually guaranteed by anyone. Like it's a lot of blogging. A lot of people have a lot of opinions right now, but they didn't actually do any research on it. Um, it's just not a good time to read timelines as much as like if you actually cared about certain people on your timeline, why not just call them like we were saying? Like most people want to hear someone's voice right now. I know, like for instance, like I haven't seen my mom since I got back from Europe 2 weeks ago. I'm still in self isolation. So, but my mom calls me every single day now. It's the most she's ever called me. Like people are scared and they want to hear the voice of their family and friends. So it's a good time to also just take a step away from all that stuff we were doing every day, anyways, and do something different. This is a good time to learn skills, read books, master things, Google the answers to the questions that are in your head, and just call people.
I totally agree. And before we go, let's leave it on this note. I know there's a lot of people out there that are suffering, and if you need someone to talk to, shoot me a message, give me a call. I've had some really bigger name people who are having the similar situations, and don't think it's just you. There's guys who are millionaires, billionaires that are still depressed
Yeah.
and having these problems as well. So it's not a class problem. It's not a race, ethnicity problem. It's a worldwide problem right now, and something we should be more aware of. I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. There were people depressed before this even happened, and now they're just more depressed. So,
Yeah.
um, we all kind of know someone as well that's been affected by it. So I
Yeah.
know my family was directly affected by it once. So it's something that I hold close. So
Yeah.
that's why I wanted to bring it up.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Anything else you want to say before we get out of here?
Not really. I guess from my standpoint, Grappling Industries will be back once society gets back, I suppose.
Going to be back better than ever. I'm looking forward to it because I know you're working hard behind the scenes, and I can't wait to see how you guys pivot it and improve through all of this.
It's going to be an interesting time, yeah. Whenever it is, we're ready to just get back to work. My entire team is ready to get back to work.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Dave. I'm gonna
Thank
end
you.
the live broadcast now, and we'll be back again tomorrow with my firearms instructor Billy Tutko from Tutko Tactical. All right, guys, take it easy.